The man was surrounded by police, yet he didn't panic. He pulled a wire from the inspector's jacket, helping him crack a difficult financial case. In return, the man demanded that the inspector visit him in prison a week later. They struck a deal. Just once. Fine. This is the security thread from a Canadian $100 bill. The man's name was Neal, a master forger and con artist. They say there's nothing he can't steal. Neal slicked back his hair, pulled a guard's uniform hidden inside the toilet tank, and walked out of the restroom with ease. Passing through the workshop, none of the other inmates noticed anything unusual. He then used a swipe card to open a door, but just as he stepped out, another guard stopped him. The guard smiled, thinking Neal was a new hire, never imagining a convict would dare something so bold. Next, Neal walked straight out of the prison gates. He spotted a car, started the engine, cranked up the music, and even found $200 in the glove compartment. Calmly, he drove away. At a shop, Neal spent all the cash on a jacket identical to a staff uniform. Finally, he headed to the airport, chose a car he liked, and the owner, thinking Neal was an attendant, not only tipped him $100 but also handed over the keys to a limited edition Rolls-Royce. Truly, he was a genius criminal. Meanwhile, when the warden discovered Neal's escape, he immediately called Agent Peter, the man who had personally caught Neal 4 years earlier. Learning that Neal had walked out through the front gate, the warden was furious. Back then, Peter had gone through hell to capture him. Now Neal was free, like a fish back in water. But something felt off. Neal had only 4 months left on his sentence. Why risk everything now? There had to be an urgent reason. Sure enough, reviewing the prison footage, Peter saw Neal's girlfriend Kate visiting him with a troubled look. Skilled at lip reading, Peter picked up the clue immediately. Kate had broken up with Neal. Clearly, this escape had something to do with her. Mobilizing a team, Peter rushed to Kate's place. Neal was indeed there, desperate to find her, but the place was empty. Even a master criminal could be a fool for love. Peter asked if it was worth it. Neal had only 4 months left, but now he'd added 4 more years for escaping. Neal didn't care. Kate's departure had left him devastated. Just as Peter was about to take him back, Neal noticed the wire on his jacket. Curious, he asked about it, and Peter admitted he was investigating a financial criminal known as the Dutchman, someone on par with Neal. That very morning, they had found evidence, but when their safe expert cracked the code, the combination turned out to be 324. By the time Peter realized the trick, it was too late. All the evidence inside had been destroyed, and the trail went cold. Later, they realized that 324 corresponded to the letters FBI. They had been played. Back in the present, Neal scoffed. Tricks like that from the Dutchman. He'd done them all before. If Peter agreed to visit him in a week, Neal promised a crucial lead. They made the deal. This is the security thread from a Canadian $100 bill, Neal said. No sooner had he finished than a squad of officers stormed in. See you in a week. Peter reported everything to his superiors, causing an uproar. Keeping his word, he visited Neal. Neal said Peter had a lead, but it wasn't enough. The Dutchman's methods were almost identical to his own. Without his help, catching him would take years. Neal proposed a deal. Bail him out, and he'd help close the case. Peter needed time to think. That night, Peter's wife, also in law enforcement, helped him analyze. Neal had managed to break out of a maximum security prison in under a month. Why would he sit around waiting at his girlfriend's place to get caught? Maybe Neal wanted to bait Peter into letting him out, only to double-cross him later. Her words hit home. The next day, Neal walked out of prison with an ankle monitor. Peter told him, "If you help me catch the Dutchman, I'll arrange 4 years of work release with the FBI. But if you run, I'll make sure you rot in prison." A carrot and stick approach. He then took Neal to his new place, a rundown motel. For this price, it's already a good deal. If you can find something better, be my guest. Those words, "be my guest," were all Neal needed. He headed to a thrift store, ready to pick up a few items to polish up his look and plan his next big move. At this moment, a wealthy widow walked into the thrift shop to sell off expensive clothes. Neal immediately recognized they were all luxury pieces. He struck up a conversation and learned they had belonged to her late husband. She didn't want the memories haunting her, so she sold them. With his charm and good looks, Neal managed to get the clothes for free. Not only that, but she also asked him to help look after her house. "Is your house nearby?" "Very close." Meanwhile, Peter came to Neal's motel, but the owner handed him a slip of paper with an address. Peter rushed over, and when he saw the mansion, he was stunned. Nervously ringing the bell, he was greeted by a maid. "I think I've come to the wrong place." "You must be Peter, right? He's upstairs." Peter went in and found Neal calmly enjoying afternoon tea. Jealous and annoyed, he asked how Neal had gotten there. Learning that Neal was house-sitting and occasionally looking after the widow's granddaughter, Peter mocked him, saying he must be playing the gigolo. Just then, a beautiful young woman appeared. It was the widow's granddaughter. Peter could barely contain his irritation. He quickly urged Neal to change clothes, reminding him it was time to work, while he himself sat down to enjoy the rich man's life. A little later, the widow arrived. Peter warned her that Neal was still serving his sentence under surveillance. To his surprise, she replied casually, "My husband was too." Moments later, Neal came downstairs in an aristocratic suit, looking every bit the gentleman. Next to him, Peter seemed like an underling. From that day, their partnership officially began. To earn his release, Neal had to help Peter catch the criminal known as the Dutchman. Their only lead was a few comic books intercepted at customs. After inspection, nothing suspicious turned up. Peter went to question the courier, but the man's lawyer showed up almost immediately. By law, Peter had to step back. Outside, furious, he asked the guards why they let the man call his lawyer. He didn't call anyone. Then how did the lawyer know? Realizing something was wrong, Peter rushed back into the holding cell, but it was too late. Their only lead had been silenced, and the case hit a dead end. Still, Neal wasn't convinced. The Dutchman must have had a reason for smuggling in those books. His sharp mind started connecting the dots. The comic books were printed on paper manufactured in 1944. Each cover page contained a sheet of sheepskin parchment from that same year. That was the real prize, rare material perfect for counterfeiting. Peter recalled the Dutchman's last known appearance at the museum, so the two headed there. The curator said the man had visited twice, fascinated by a certain bond certificate, even taking a picture of it. Comparing the parchment, Neal confirmed the size and material matched. According to the curator, only one authentic bond existed, and each could fetch as much as $248,000 if redeemed. If the Dutchman managed to counterfeit hundreds, he'd strike it rich. Neal then made a shocking discovery. This one's a fake. Impossible, it's been here since 1952. Back at the office, they pieced the clues together. The first visit was for photographing the bond to create a replica. The second visit was to swap the real one with the fake. If successful, when he sold hundreds of counterfeit bonds, they would all be compared against the museum's fake original. Genuine and fake would blur together, and his forgeries would be accepted for redemption. He'd become a billionaire. But now that the FBI knew, they wouldn't let it happen. Neal then turned to his old partner, Mozzie, a brilliant and pivotal figure in the series. Handing him the counterfeit bond, Neal asked who could have produced it. One glance and Mozzie called it a masterpiece, indistinguishable from the real one without direct comparison. He added that only a handful of print shops in New York could pull it off. That sparked an idea for Neal. The next day, Neal and Peter secretly checked out several print shops. Finally, they heard machines running inside an abandoned factory, a perfect setup for counterfeiting bonds, but they had no warrant, no solid evidence, and couldn't risk a raid. That didn't stop Neal. Pretending to return to the FBI office with Peter, he slipped away and boldly entered the factory. He began snapping photos of the site, but the guards quickly caught him and dragged him inside to face their boss. Inside the factory, Neal saw piles of the same comic books from before. Using heavy machinery, sheets of 1944 parchment were being turned into valuable counterfeit bonds. His suspicions were confirmed. Soon after, he was locked inside a glass chamber. Neal quickly tried the key.
Open the door!
That sounds like inch-thick leg sand.
Keys are on the way.
Nice.
The mastermind revealed himself. It was the Dutchman, the man behind the counterfeit operation. Furious, he made it clear that once the door opened, Neal was a dead man. At that critical moment, police sirens blared outside. Dozens of cars surrounded the factory. Neal's tracker had gone beyond its range, leading Peter straight to him. As the Dutchman tried to flee, armed agents arrested him on the spot. Even without a search warrant, storming a private facility to catch a criminal was perfectly justified. The Dutchman, once so smug, was forced to surrender. Peter beamed at Neal, delighted. He realized that their old cat-and-mouse game hadn't ended because he won, it ended because Neal chose to stop playing. To keep Neal close, Peter secured him a role as an FBI consultant. Instead of 4 more years behind bars, Neal would serve his time working under Peter's supervision. Do you agree? Of course. On his very first day, Neal demanded a lavish party. The Bureau's stingy budget only gave him $5,000, but Neal had a plan. He convinced Peter to raid the FBI's dusty evidence locker for old valuables. Neal would handle the venue and recruit the models, not just for fun. The FBI had intel. A master forger known as the Ghost had come to New York. Rumor had it he'd forged prototype euro notes and was preparing for a deal. There were no photos of him, but one thing was certain, he was a womanizer. A party filled with supermodels was bait he couldn't resist. With only $5,000, Neal and Peter rented a glamorous venue and spread the word. That evening, Neal made a few calls and gathered hundreds of stunning models. The FBI watched discreetly from the sidelines. Model Tara, who had once heard the Ghost's voice, stayed close to Neal to help identify him. Neal soon noticed a man who seemed out of place. Introducing himself, the man said his name was Dmitri, claiming he was there just to enjoy the view. Moments later, Dmitri stepped aside to take a call. Tara shook her head. This wasn't the ghost, but when Dmitri spoke, his Hebrew accent caught her attention. That was the very language the ghost often used. From the call, it was clear Dmitri was waiting for someone, likely the ghost himself. Neal acted fast. He asked a short-haired model to distract Dmitri while he brushed past and swiped his phone. Unbeknownst to him, the ghost had been watching the entire time. Suspicious, he quietly slipped away, planting his phone in another man's pocket before leaving. Neal dialed the ghost's number. A ringtone echoed, and the unsuspecting man pulled a phone from his pocket, only to be tackled by nearby agents. But as he cried out, Tara confirmed, "That's not the ghost." Neal realized he had been outplayed. The ghost wasn't going to be easy prey. The perfect plan had collapsed. Still, they now had a face to connect to the ghost, and a new lead, Dmitri. Investigations revealed Dmitri was actually an internationally wanted criminal, likely the ghost's buyer, but he had disappeared the day before. To track him, Neal and Peter visited the model who had spent the night with the ghost. There, they were surprised to find Dmitri again. Having lost his phone, he couldn't contact the ghost and hoped to find him through the model. Thinking quickly, Neal handed Peter sunglasses, telling him to play the role of his bodyguard, and confronted Dmitri directly. "We're on the same side, we both want the ghost," Neal said. Dmitri, assuming Neal was another buyer, ordered his guards to kick them out. Outside, Neal wasn't angry. Instead, he told Peter, if they followed Dmitri, they'd eventually find the ghost. They trailed him to a hotel, waiting half a day without any progress. Then came the report. Dmitri had already been dead for some time. Though no evidence pointed to the killer, one thing was certain: the murder was the work of the ghost. Neal noticed Dmitri's red suit right away. After some digging, he discovered a hidden pocket inside, but it was empty. The suit itself was rare, so Neal had his assistant gather catalogs from recent fashion shows. Sure enough, the red suit came from a well-known designer. The man admitted that 2 deaths had already been linked to it and finally revealed the truth. He had been threatened by the ghost, forced to hide something inside the suit. Since outfits for the show weren't inspected, the item had made it into New York. To secure his spot in the event, the designer created 2 identical suits, but when the ghost came to collect, he panicked and handed over the wrong one. The real suit meant for the ghost was still in his possession. The FBI immediately secured evidence and found counterfeit Euro prototypes. Neal quickly pieced it together. During the exchange, Dmitri thought the ghost had double-crossed him. A fight broke out, ending with Dmitri's death. The truth was clear now. All that remained was to wait for the ghost to come after the designer. As expected, the ghost called. "Who did you sell it to?" Cut to Neal and model Tara attending a party. Tara wore the red dress. One of the ghost's men approached them with a phone.
Hello. I recognize you from the party.
Without hesitation, the man offered $5 million for the dress. With this lead secured, Neal went back to prepare the sting. But then news came in. Tara's escort vehicle had been attacked, and she'd been kidnapped. Neal's phone rang.
I have your girl. What's the dress worth to you now?
The ghost already knew they were FBI. He demanded Peter personally handle the exchange, setting the meeting for the next afternoon in a city park. He arrogantly added that Peter could bring as many agents as he liked. The next day, the operation began. Peter brought the dress to the park. At the appointed time, his phone rang. He signaled an agent to trace the call, but the ghost realized the park was swarming with law enforcement. He ordered Peter to sprint 300 meters to a nearby lake within 1 minute. Any tail, and the hostage would die. Peter raced ahead, telling his team to stay put. At the lake, the ghost appeared with Tara. She was rigged with explosives. He warned that 1 call would detonate the bomb, and that 5 more devices were planted around the park. Helpless, Peter watched him walk away with the dress. In the surveillance van, Neal had a sudden idea. He dialed the ghost's number.
Yes.
Hey, is this Steve? Scam his phone so he can't trigger the bomb. Keep calling him.
With constant calls flooding his phone, the ghost couldn't act. Distracted, he was quickly subdued by an agent. Peter managed to disarm the explosives strapped to Tara. Later, Neal returned just as Peter finally stood up, exhausted but relieved. Soon after, the FBI began watching a casino disguised as a restaurant. Before they could move, a guard knocked on their car window. Peter rolled it down. "You guys FBI. We need your help." Amazingly, the very criminals under surveillance had come seeking aid. The casino boss, Steve, explained that while he wasn't exactly a saint, he was a devout believer. Not long ago, he had donated a centuries-old Bible, over 500 years of history, to a church, but it had been stolen. To him, the book was sacred. This revelation drew immediate attention from the higher-ups. Understanding the weight of religious faith, they advised Peter to prioritize recovering the Bible over the casino case. Thinking fast, Peter replied, "We'll help you get it back, but you shut down the illegal gambling." Steve shrugged, it was just small business to him, and agreed. Naturally, Neal was brought onto the case. He and Peter inspected the scene of the theft. No signs of forced entry, no cameras. Solving this looked nearly impossible. Back at the office, Mozzie stepped in. His sharp analysis pointed out that a rare Bible like this wouldn't be stolen for money. It was too hard to sell. Known as the Healing Bible, legend said that touching it could cure any illness. Right after Mozzie's analysis, Neal came up with an idea. He and Peter went back to the church, asking the caretaker if anyone had recently come seeking exorcisms or healing. The caretaker mentioned a homeless man, but insisted he was too kind-hearted to have stolen the Bible. When they tracked him down, the man immediately confessed. He had taken the book to heal his sick dog, but it hadn't worked. Later, a stranger approached him, promising the best vet money could buy if he handed over the Bible. The man agreed, and the stranger vanished. Once he realized how important the Bible was, the homeless man agreed to help the FBI identify the thief. Unfortunately, nothing came of it. At that moment, a new case landed on Peter's desk. Steve's grandson had just been shot dead. The homeless man recognized the victim as the very one who had taken the Bible. Peter rushed to the crime scene, but aside from shell casings, there were no leads. Meanwhile, Neal brought Mozzie to the victim's house. To their surprise, the thug's home was filled with history books, all written by the same author, Maria. Neal remembered a mysterious trafficker who shared that surname. If the two were connected, the cases might be linked. Neal and Peter quickly sought Maria out. The moment she heard Neal's name, she was intrigued. And very handsome, too. "So it really is you." She teased him about once being a master conman, now working for the FBI. Peter cut the chatter short, asking if she'd seen the Bible or Steve's grandson. Maria showed no reaction, forcing them to leave a business card and tell her to call with any leads. Back at the office, they analyzed the situation. Either Maria truly knew nothing, or she was the mastermind. If it was the latter, her reach would be terrifying. From their exchange, Neal sensed Maria was far from ordinary. He theorized, Steve's grandson had likely read her books, learned the Healing Bible was worth a fortune, and, knowing his uncle had donated it, tricked the homeless man into stealing it. That way Steve would suspect nothing. But when the grandson tried to deal with Maria, something went wrong, and she killed him. It was the only explanation that fit. To dig deeper, Peter decided Neal should use his charm to draw Maria out. Cut to their dinner date. As Neal flirted with her, FBI agents snuck into her house, nearly dropping a vase. One of them stuffed a bug inside just in time. When Maria returned, she poured another drink but quickly noticed something had been tampered with. Facing Neal, she demanded to know what he wanted. Realizing the ruse was up, Neal played it straight. He pulled the bug from the vase, tossed it into her glass, and admitted he was spying for the FBI to cut a deal, but he was personally interested in the Bible as well. He even offered $250,000 for it. Maria relaxed. Neal's direct, unorthodox approach was nothing like the FBI's usual methods. He pressed further. "The Bible is worth far more than that. Whoever holds it will be hunted by both the law and the mob. I'm the only one who can protect you." She agreed to the deal. Later, Neal begged until his superiors approved the $250,000 buy. Risky as it was, they had no choice but to trust him. On the day of the exchange, Neal and Maria greeted each other with an embrace. He whispered, "That truck is tailing us," then used a knife to cut off his ankle monitor. Convinced of his sincerity, Maria changed the location. Agents outside panicked. The shabby truck couldn't possibly keep up had they just unleashed Neal again. But Peter stayed calm. Everything was part of the plan. With the FBI monitoring closely, there was no way Maria could escape. By the river, Neal and Maria opened the car trunk. Inside was the rare Bible. After checking, Neal confirmed it was authentic.
Here it is. Thank you very much.
Just when he thought it was over, Maria pulled a gun. So Steve's grandson must have died the same way. She was ruthless. But Neal wasn't about to surrender. During their earlier embrace, he had secretly removed the magazine.
You forgot about the one in the chamber.
But Maria was indeed a devil, always carrying a loaded gun. Seeing Neal refuse to hand over the Bible, she pulled the trigger. At that moment, Peter and the FBI rushed in. Cornered, Maria surrendered. Neal was unharmed. The thick Bible had absorbed the bullet. He handed the book to the agents. Steve arrived, demanding it back, but Neal said a colleague had already taken it. That colleague was Mozzie, disguised as an FBI agent. In a way, they truly were partners. Furious, Steve threatened Neal's life if he didn't return the Bible. But to Neal, a master conman, Steve was nothing more than a fly. Only Peter knew what Neal was really playing at. Later, at the church, they saw the homeless man clutching the Bible. Steve tried to snatch it back, but when he learned the man only stole it to heal his sick dog.
I got this vet in Yonkers. Want to take a ride, go see him, have it checked out?
This was Neal and Peter's real plan. The Bible couldn't cure the dog, but Steve, a mob boss who loved dogs, could. Letting him help cost nothing. Sometimes we know the truth but can't act on it. Life's pressures push us to desperate measures. This scene carried a message, a hope to overcome hardships. Neal showed documents to a car wash owner, accusing him of being tied to a case, while Mozzie pretended to inspect the car. Found explosive residue. Neal gave him two choices. Let me drive it out, and everyone stays safe. Or we'll pull prints and find out whose they are. Knowing Neal wasn't bluffing, the owner accepted a citation and let them go. But why would Neal, an FBI consultant, do such a thing? It all traced back to a gold theft. John, the husband of Elizabeth's best friend, was a soldier now suspected of involvement. Among the evidence, police found his fingerprints and hair, but Elizabeth refused to believe it, and John insisted he was framed. He told Peter that while overseas, a man named Ames from Internal Affairs had asked him to bring back some items. John refused, telling Peter to check him out. Neal carefully observed John's behavior and later told Peter, John wasn't lying. To smuggle such a large amount of gold, it would have to be melted down. No matter how careful, there would be burns, yet John's arms were unscathed. If he was innocent, Ames should be the one investigated. Peter confronted Ames at Internal Affairs, but the man refused to talk without a lawyer. When Peter pressed further, a bodyguard intervened. That's when Peter noticed the burn marks on Ames's hands, clear evidence he might be involved. Back at the office, Peter examined the evidence and noticed something odd. John's fingerprints were unusually clear, as if deliberately planted. Even stranger, they were all from his left hand, highly suspicious. Later over lunch, Neal pointed out something else. Peter had been holding his beer bottle only with his right hand. What's wrong? We've been here an hour. And the whole time, you only held the beer with your right hand. Neal concluded, whoever drank with John had taken his prints. Peter went home and asked his wife and her friend Dana if John had been drinking with anyone lately. Through tears, Dana admitted it was with a female reporter. After that night, she felt utterly betrayed. This confirmed Peter's suspicion. The key lay with the reporter. So Neal and Peter headed to the TV station for answers. While Peter signed in at the front desk, Neal struck up a conversation with one of the anchors. At reception, Peter was told to wait upstairs since the reporter hadn't arrived yet. Glancing back, he saw Neal flirting with the anchorwoman, so he left him downstairs and went up alone. Soon after, Peter called Neal, asking him to observe the reporter's reaction. When the target appeared, Neal noticed her expression shift to panic as the receptionist mentioned an inspector was looking for her. She was clearly hiding something. To help Peter, Neal bought some coffee, greeted the receptionist like an old friend, and slipped inside. Go ahead. Neal tailed the reporter discreetly. A security guard spotted him, but just then the anchor greeted him, and Neal cleverly handed out coffee to everyone, avoiding suspicion. He watched as the reporter placed something in a desk drawer. While she went to meet Peter, Neal slipped into her office, picked the lock, and found a receipt. Peter saw Neal's illegal move but chose to ignore it to buy time. Neal tried to print the receipt, but the printer required a password. The anchorwoman walked by again, and Neal asked if the code had been changed. No worries, use mine. Once more, Neal's charm worked better than credentials. After returning the receipt, Peter wrapped up the conversation. Since the evidence was inadmissible, they couldn't approach the store as FBI. That's where Mozzie came in. Mozzie, I need your help. Mozzie's resourcefulness came through again. He secured proof from the reporter. Investigation revealed the coin was evidence from the gold theft. Neal and Peter confronted the reporter with it. Facing charges, she confessed everything. Ames had used his position to rob a foreign museum, but someone had to take the fall. John was set up. Back then, she was a war correspondent interviewing him. Drowning in debt, she struck a deal with Ames to frame him. She agreed to act as an informant. The FBI instructed her to tell Ames she had found a buyer. That buyer would be Neal, only he could pull it off. They even gave him a luxury car. You're kidding, right? The car was older than Neal, so he and Mozzie staged a scene at a car wash to swap it for a Rolls-Royce. At the meet, Mozzie posed as driver. Agents played Neal's assistants, while the FBI monitored. Ames, trusting the reporter, led them to the stash of gold. Neal's smooth performance was flawless. Ames was impressed.
Would you like to see the actual pieces then?
I think I already have.
I've always believed it's the best place to hide something.
The reporter's face paled. She knew what was coming. Ames sensed something off, ordered his men to hold everyone at gunpoint, and slipped away.
Deal with the FBI.
Agents moved in. Guns were raised. The FBI warned the bodyguard. His boss had abandoned him, and if he fired, he'd rot in prison. Meanwhile, Peter chased Ames. Mozzie stayed in the car, munching snacks, watching the chase unfold. Peter was pinned down, unable to move.
Not what I needed today.
Hearing screeching brakes, Peter peeked out to see Ames knocked down by a car. Pretend you never saw me. The FBI stormed the museum, the bodyguard surrendered, evidence was secured, and Ames was caught. Peter smiled inwardly. Neal's reputation as a master conman was well earned. Neal, the infamous forger, was now painting a replica of a multi-million-dollar artwork. This might fool the experts, but not the boss. Confident in his skill, Neal had added a special inscription on the back. When he presented the fake to his handler, "Any problems?" "No, just remember, there's always a higher mountain." The case went back a few days. Neal had been called in when a young heiress, who lost her parents, inherited a fortune. Carelessly, she bought a $2.6 million painting to display above her fireplace, too rich to care. The night before, the young woman returned home and found a burglar. He didn't try to hurt her, only restrained her and stole the painting. Even when she fought back, he did nothing more than escape. Later, Peter asked her to show them a photo of the artwork. At that moment, her uncle arrived. They greeted each other briefly. Using his criminal instincts, Neal deduced the thief must have known the family. Peter followed up with the uncle. While the woman pulled out a photo of her grandmother, Neal couldn't help but remark, "You and your grandmother are both beautiful. I'll take that as a compliment." With his deadly charm, Neal captivated her instantly. Peter cut in just in time to drag him away. Outside, Peter still hadn't questioned the uncle when the man's lawyer suddenly appeared, answering everything for him. Neal immediately grew suspicious. Acting on his own, Neal waited by the uncle's car. With a few slick moves, he got the man talking. "My lawyer told me not to speak to the FBI. Do I look like the FBI? Did he send you? What do you think? I knew this would happen." It turned out the uncle was drowning in debt. To appease loan sharks, he let them stage the burglary and steal the painting. Unfortunately, his niece came home early and saw everything. To calm the gang, he even signed a check begging for forgiveness. Neal relayed this to Peter. With the payee's name, the FBI tracked the loan sharks. Since they'd want to sell the painting, Neal and Peter staged a trap with an art dealer, claiming a wealthy buyer was interested. The next day, Neal met them at the deal. He retrieved the painting, ready to call Peter once it was authenticated, but the criminals were cautious and quickly spotted the surveillance outside. "My French girlfriend just arrived last night. I don't want to keep her waiting." He pulled a gun, accusing Neal of tipping off the FBI. Neal flipped it back on him, asking if he had been lured there instead. Confused, the man panicked and bolted with both the painting and the cash. Peter chased him, but the place was a maze. They lost him again. To maintain cover, Peter arrested both Neal and the art dealer. Back at the office, the museum curator was waiting. He promised that if the painting was recovered, it would go to the museum. It had been missing for decades. Neal was stunned. He called the young woman, and they learned the painter was her great-grandmother. The work had been stolen long ago and placed in the museum, then stolen back by her great-grandmother. The story was far more complicated than they thought. Still, the priority was catching the thief and retrieving the money and painting. Neal recalled him mentioning a French girlfriend who just arrived last night. Checking flight records, they found 7 women named Bridget who had landed in New York. Agents tailed them all. Neal picked one at a hotel. His instincts said that was the spot. The operation began. In the lobby, Neal carefully observed. Sure enough, he found a platinum blonde French speaker. Switching to French, he struck up a conversation. When she saw him, she smiled warmly and even invited him upstairs. Neal rushed back to Peter, dragging him along. In the room, Neal excused himself to the bathroom, where he discovered a hidden chamber. Using his lock-picking skills, he broke in while Peter kept the woman distracted. Behind a mirror, he uncovered the missing painting. On the back, he found the artist's inscription, proof it was truly the great-grandmother's work. Everything the young woman said was true. The next day, when the criminal returned to his hotel, he found the painting gone. Reading the note left behind, he knew Neal had taken it. He called, "I know you and the broker are working together. If you don't want her hurt, bring the painting back." Neal refused. Instead, he came up with another plan, replicating the artwork with a flawless forgery. At the exchange, Neal handed over the fake. Before the criminal could check, police swarmed in. No matter how cunning he was, he couldn't escape Neal's setup. But it didn't end there. When the painting was returned to its handler, the man quickly realized it was fake. From the front it was perfect, but only he knew the secret on the back. Now, however, the inscription clearly proved who the work belonged to. Realizing someone had interfered, he swallowed the loss. If his past crimes were exposed, he'd be ruined. Meanwhile, Neal gave the real painting back to the young woman. To win her over, he had risked everything. Soon after, the FBI lost contact with an undercover agent. Suspecting foul play by a money launderer, they needed proof. Neal was ordered to revive his old identity. Years ago, under the alias Nicholas, Neal had swindled millions in the Canary Islands. Everyone knew it was his work, but there was no proof, though he never admitted it. Now the FBI wanted him to pull the same con again. Nicholas is happy to help. A detailed plan was made. They went to Chinatown, where a hotel owner arranged lodging. The man despised the launderer's casino for hurting his business, so he was eager to help. But when Peter entered, he frightened the man's daughter to tears. Luckily, Neal's sleight of hand calmed her with a smile. Every time you do that trick, I check my wallet afterward. Back to business. Neal's performance wasn't a concern, but the casino's tight security was, so they removed his ankle monitor, replacing it with a bugged watch. At the casino, Neal breezed through security and joined a card table, hoping to draw the launderer out. Before long, a woman sat beside him. Neal assumed she was just attracted to him and ignored it. Throughout the game, Neal deliberately lost, even folding strong hands. Guards noticed. Soon, the launderer arrived. Neal introduced himself as Nicholas, a name the man instantly recognized. Neal suggested, "Too crowded here, let's talk elsewhere." With Nicholas's reputation, the launderer didn't hesitate. But then disaster struck. Another police unit was moving toward the casino. Peter scrambled to call it off, but too late. Guards spotted them. Suspicion fell on Neal, and the launderer was whisked away. When agents stormed in, Neal vaulted across a table and bolted to avoid exposure. Outside, he called Peter. "Tell them to stop, or the mission's blown." Just then, the launderer's men caught him, but the mysterious woman appeared, claiming she'd been sent to protect Neal. Relieved, the launderer agreed to continue the deal. "Any problems? He's trying to salvage the mission." Later, Neal followed her to a hotel. She told him, "The boss wants me to keep you safe." Then she removed his watch and smashed it with a glass of wine. The FBI instantly lost his signal. Drawing a gun, she said, "Nicholas would never wear a fake watch, but you, I'm not so sure." Neal froze. This woman knew him too well. Finally, she revealed her identity. Her name was Mei Ling, an international agent. They had been targeting the money launderer for a long time, but the Federal Bureau's interference ruined everything. Mei Ling added, "He was just a small fish. The real prize was the boss behind him." Mei Ling also claimed to know where Neal's girlfriend was. She promised that if he cooperated, he would see her once the case was closed. Desperate, Neal kept this from Peter, only saying he had broken his watch and asked for a new one. But he underestimated the FBI's intelligence network. Agents reported that a woman named Mei Ling had tipped off the police the night before, the same woman who took Neal away. Digging deeper, they discovered she held a position at a shell company that profited from the laundering. Finally, they confirmed she was indeed an international agent. Clearly, more than just the FBI was after this target. Soon after, Peter brought Neal to the shell company. "Open the door. Don't we need a warrant? Since when are you such a model citizen?" "I'm shocked." Peter handed Neal a toolkit. Within moments, Neal had the lock open. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, as if someone had been dragged away. Following the trail, they opened a freezer. Inside was the missing undercover agent, dead. Just then, the launderer and his men entered. Neal and Peter hid, realizing the gang was there to move the body. Outside, Peter lashed out. "You knew Mei Ling's identity. Why didn't you tell me? We could have planned around it." But it was too late. Back at HQ, Peter gave Neal the evidence. "She's using you. There is no boss behind him. They just want the launderer. If we catch him first, we get the $4 million bounty. If you want redemption and justice for our agent, you need to bring him in before they do." Neal, stung by betrayal, resolved to fight back. He and Peter made a new plan. Peter returned Neal's repaired watch, instructing, "Turn off the tracker before going through security. Once inside, turn it back on." He handed him a bank account. "Use this for the deal. The moment he launders money, we'll have proof." But at the meeting, Mei Ling also gave Neal an account number, telling him to use it instead. She added, "I know who's holding your girlfriend." Neal hesitated. Eventually, Neal met the launderer. After much maneuvering, the deal went through. Looking at Mei Ling, he announced her account number. Once linked, every transfer to him appeared clean. During the talks, the launderer, curious about Nicholas's reputation, challenged Neal to a few games. Neal quickly lost everything, even his watch, but before handing it over, he had activated its tracker and bug. "We've got a signal." Wearing the watch, the launderer mocked, "Your reputation as Nicholas doesn't match your skills." He had no idea he was trapped. Later, he chatted with his men, even discussing moving the body. Every word was captured by the FBI. Neal's clever play won them the evidence they needed. The man would likely spend half his life in prison. Afterward, Neal realized Peter hadn't deceived him. Mei Ling knew nothing about his girlfriend. The USB she left was empty. Bitterly, Neal understood he'd been played. But then Mei Ling called again. "I don't know where she is, but I know who's holding her, a federal agent." Neal froze. He was about to press for details when she hung up. Looking around, he wondered, was the man holding his girlfriend right here among them? Was this just Mei Ling's attempt to sow distrust, or the truth? Neal didn't know. Neither do I. Let's wait and see what happens next. Neal pretended he was ready to confess all his crimes, but claimed the details were too sensitive to say in open court. The judge agreed to question him privately. Mozzie, however, had already cut the air conditioning, forcing the judge to open a window. Once the guards left, Neal calmly said, "I admit I've done a lot of bad things in my life. But I didn't steal that diamond." The judge grew furious, accusing Neal of mocking him, but before he could react, Neal leapt out the window, rolling onto the awning below and walking off with swagger. Neal knew he'd been framed. He and his girlfriend were caught in a larger conspiracy, and this desperate trick was his only move. It all began with a jewelry heist. A 42-carat ruby diamond had been swapped. Surveillance showed the thief covering the camera, then boldly waving before disappearing. Strangely, the gem was still in the store. The owner suspected it was fake. She waited for an appraiser, but Peter insisted he had someone better, Neal. After inspection, Neal confirmed the diamond was counterfeit. The thief's skill was extraordinary, leaving behind a flawless replica. Peter couldn't help but suspect, who else could bypass security and forge so perfectly but Neal? Back at the office, they were confronted by Agent Fowler, who oversaw internal affairs. He accused Neal of being the prime suspect. The theft matched his old style, and worse, Neal's ankle monitor had lost signal for 6 hours the night before, deliberately erased by someone inside. Peter refused to believe it, insisting Neal had changed. Neal, unaware of this, listed suspects, including Durant, another master forger. When they visited Durant, he immediately handed over proof of his alibi, knowing police would come. Neal and Peter were left speechless. Determined to clear Neal, Peter ordered the diamond re-examined. He knew Neal always left a hidden signature on his forgeries, a mark he was proud of. If none was found, Neal was clean, but the test revealed Neal's mark etched into the stone. "Neal, you're under arrest." Stunned, Neal protested. He had checked earlier, there had been no mark. Clearly, someone was framing him. In jail, Neal maintained his innocence, but the evidence was damning. Then Mozzie appeared, disguised as Neal's lawyer. "He's an attorney. Check my degree if you like." Peter was baffled. As always, Mozzie pulled off the impossible. Better yet, Mozzie brought news. As Neal's lawyer, he had access to his files. Among them, one section had been destroyed by Fowler. Luckily, Mozzie recovered it, revealing a shocking secret. Neal realized he was caught in a grander scheme and had to plan an escape. On trial day, Mozzie had everything set. Peter learned Neal would disclose classified material and the judge had agreed to a private session. Instantly, Peter knew Neal was planning something. Inside, when the judge unlatched the window in the sweltering room, Neal bolted, just as Peter expected. Watching from outside, Peter didn't stop him. Once again, Neal had escaped, and once again, it was Peter's burden to bring him back, something he had already done twice before. Back home, Peter noticed his wife acting strangely, because Neal was hiding there. Neal insisted he'd been framed and handed over a file containing transcripts of his conversations with Peter. Checking the house phone, Peter discovered a bug, Fowler's handiwork. "Peter, the first reviewed all my internal FBI files. You asked John to verify if my name was on the fake. After that, suddenly my name appeared on the diamond." Neal suspected Fowler had staged the theft, erased the ankle monitor records, and framed him, but why? He believed it was connected to Kate's disappearance. Since she'd been taken by an FBI agent, the prime suspect was Fowler. But what did he want with her? To find out, Peter secretly took Neal back to the crime scene. Reviewing the entrance cameras showed nothing, proof the thief used another exit. Searching the store, Neal spotted an odd light panel. Inside was a hidden tunnel. They followed it, emerging onto a busy street. Checking the street camera, they saw a man crawl out of the sewer the day of the theft. Though his face wasn't clear, the way he stared at a passing woman gave him away. It was Tulane, the very suspect Neal had pegged. Back at the office, Fowler arrived just as Peter reported Tulane's arrest and the diamonds recovered from his mansion. With evidence stacked against him, Tulane admitted he was working for someone inside the FBI, but he refused to name names, preferring prison over betraying his boss. Fowler entered right on cue. "Say the name, and I'll clear you of all charges." Tulane stayed silent. The diamond case was officially closed. Fowler prepared to leave, but Peter warned him, "If you ever bug my house again, you'll regret it." That evening, everyone celebrated Neal's exoneration. He was slowly being accepted as family. But halfway through the party, Neal got a call. It was Kate, his long-lost girlfriend. She warned him, "Don't trust anyone. The one you should fear is right beside you. If he makes demands, agree to them. You can't win against him." Then she hung up, leaving Neal shaken. Moments later, Kate appeared in person. "Hello, Kate. Hello, Peter. We need to talk about Neal." Soon after, Neal interviewed for a position at a fraudulent investment firm. The manager asked him to make a test sales call. The moment the line connected, Peter was listening in. Even knowing it was an act, Neal's silver tongue sent chills down Peter's spine. Had he not known better, he'd have invested in the worthless stock Neal pitched.
But let's make it 5,000 shares.
Neal's ability to spin words into gold impressed the manager, but for a master con artist, it was child's play. In truth, the firm specialized in buying worthless stocks cheaply, then using persuasive brokers to hype them up. The stocks would skyrocket briefly. When the time was right, the firm dumped its holdings for massive profit, while naive investors were left ruined. To take down the scam investment firm, the FBI set up a shell company selling cheap stocks. After months of effort, the criminals finally took the bait. But at this stage, only one female agent had managed to infiltrate the firm. Her role was limited to menial tasks like serving drinks, keeping her far from the inner circle. To secure the operation, Peter deployed his ace, Neal, the brilliant and charming con artist. On his very first day, Neal outsold the company's best broker. All those trades, of course, were controlled by the FBI. The boss quickly noticed and invited Neal to dinner. At their first meeting, Neal observed tension between the boss, Avery, and his partner, Reed. He tipped off the FBI, who concluded that while the two men worked together, each was plotting against the other. Clues pointed to Avery's scheming to push Reed out. The FBI planned to exploit this division. Still, to dismantle the company, they needed Avery's financial records. To move quickly, Peter posed as a CEO and met Avery directly. At first, Peter confronted him. "You've been buying up my worthless stocks to scam people, haven't you?" Avery panicked, fearing exposure, but Peter smoothly pivoted. "If we work together, we can make real money, and I'll forget the past." Avery quickly agreed. That night, Avery hosted a dinner in Peter's honor. Neal, as the firm's star salesman, was invited too. Reed, however, was pointedly excluded. Avery showed Peter his private collection, priceless artwork and artifacts, each worth a luxury car. The security system was airtight. Any theft would trigger a lockdown, draining the oxygen within 10 minutes. Afterward, Avery introduced Peter around. At that moment, the undercover female agent was nearly exposed. With no backup nearby, she was in grave danger. Thinking fast, Peter pointed to Neal. "He's the mole." A search revealed a recording pen planted on Neal. Neal coolly confessed, "Reed sent me. Everyone knows he's trying to take you down. I just came to confirm it." Believing him, Avery ordered the woman released. Satisfied, Avery turned to Neal. "How much is Reed paying you?" "I'll double it." Neal named a price, and Avery agreed. Back at the office, Neal met with Reed. "Avery's planning to cut you out," he said bluntly.
"I want you to tell Reed that we're going to dump the stock next Friday." "When's the real dump?" "This Friday. While we're celebrating, he'll get to watch his stock become completely worthless."
Furious, Reed listened as Neal added, "Avery trusts me completely, but if you make me your equal, I'll help you destroy him. What do you want?" "His financial ledgers, proof he's running everything." But Reed explained Avery didn't trust computers. All records were handwritten, location unknown. No wonder the FBI had come up empty until now. Peter immediately thought of Avery's luxury vault. If the ledgers existed, they had to be there. But the security was top-notch. When triggered, polycarbonate glass seals the room, and vacuum pumps suck out all the oxygen. Of course, there had to be an emergency switch, but only Avery knew where. The dangerous task fell to Neal. The FBI equipped him with a mini oxygen tank, enough for 5 minutes, just long enough for a rescue team to break in.
5 minutes worth of air. What's your response time?
Roughly 5 minutes.
Peter promised to cover him. On Friday, as the firm prepared its stock dump, Neal slipped away toward the vault. He discovered every item was rigged to an alarm, touch anything, and the system would activate. As he studied it, Reed stormed in, raging at Avery's betrayal. "You hired him. I just handed him back to you." Reed swore he never planted a spy. Peter, sensing danger, quickly warned Neal. Meanwhile, Avery demanded Neal's whereabouts. The manager claimed he was with a waitress until she appeared in the lobby, revealing Neal had outsmarted them both. The FBI, realizing the mission was compromised, moved in. In the vault, Neal triggered the failsafe. The doors sealed, oxygen drained. With only one tank, Neal handed it to Peter. Peter didn't hesitate, he took it, knowing time was short. They searched frantically for the emergency switch while Avery watched calmly from outside, eager to see them suffocate. As seconds ticked by, Neal collapsed unconscious. Peter had no choice. He drew his gun, aimed at Avery, and hit the switch.
Hands off your weapon! Hands in the air!
Backup arrived just in time. Air flooded back, reviving Neal. The near-death moment bound Peter and Neal closer than ever. Neal had given him the oxygen, and Peter vowed never to betray that trust. Peter then revealed a secret about Kate. After the diamond theft, he had met her. "Spare Neal. I can't. He stole something, a music box. It's mine." Peter asked why a music box mattered so much. Neal explained, "It had vanished during World War II, holding a massive secret inside. I want to see it. I need more time." To save Kate, Neal turned to Mozzie. "We need to find the music box," he said. Mozzie was shocked. Hadn't Neal always had it? "I never said I took it, but everyone assumed, and I didn't bother to deny it." Mozzie lit up. Neal was about to dive back into the game. In this show, Mozzie was like a portable toolkit, always there when needed. This time, he helped Peter sweep for bugs in his house. "Is that night vision binoculars? $50, Russian made. How did you even get that?" Still wary, Peter called in a trusted agent to keep an eye on him. "You're sure he won't steal anything? Do you have famous paintings or antiques at home?" "No." "Then you're fine." But who would dare bug an FBI agent's house? The answer lay in the mortgage fraud case. Neal and Peter received a tip. A man reported that after his father passed away, the family home was seized by the bank for overdue payments, but he insisted his father was an honest man who would never have mortgaged the house. Peter had heard of the case. In court, the evidence had been airtight. Everything pointed to the father taking out a mortgage. Still, Peter couldn't bear to see the family lose their home and decided to reinvestigate. That decision nearly cost him his job at the FBI. Reviewing the records, Peter discovered that the agent who handled the case had retired at just 35, right at the height of his career with a 90% clearance rate. Such an early retirement was highly suspicious. They tracked him down. At first, he walked away when they mentioned the foreclosure case, but moments later, weighed down by something, he returned and offered to buy them coffee. The detail was key. He handed over $4.76, more than the cost. It was clearly a coded message. Following the clue, Neal and Peter realized the presiding judge's license number was 476. This judge, Clark, was the real problem. Meanwhile, Mozzie uncovered another lead. Every file involving Neal carried Clark's signature. She and Fowler had been in league all along. The next morning, Peter's research revealed Clark had ruled on numerous similar foreclosure cases. In every single one, 100%, the defendants lost their homes. The pattern was undeniable. At lunch, Peter's wife casually mentioned the internet had gone down that morning, and a repairman had shown up almost instantly. Alarm bells rang in Peter's head. He called to confirm no technician had ever been dispatched. Writing a note, he told Neal, "The house is bugged." Neal kept up light conversation with Peter's wife while Peter searched the home. Sure enough, he found a listening device and crushed it in anger. Ever since the diamond heist case, Peter was certain Fowler was behind these bugs. The question was, how many more informants did he have inside the FBI? To be sure, Neal brought in Mozzie to sweep the house. Only then did he feel reassured. On their way back to the office, the two speculated, Fowler must have realized they were investigating Clark and planted the bugs to monitor their progress. Their suspicions were confirmed when Fowler himself appeared at the office, announcing he'd be staying a few days on assignment. The message was obvious. He was protecting Clark. Determined to find a crack, Neal examined the case files closely. He spotted the flaw. Every defendant's signature was forged. The hesitation in the strokes betrayed the forger. Armed with evidence, Peter confronted Clark. He warned her, if a handwriting expert examined these documents, she'd be finished. Clark faltered for a moment but quickly regained her composure. She leaned in and asked, "How much do you make a year? I'll pay you double." Peter was stunned. Bribery this brazen. Still, to draw out more information, he pretended to agree, planning to set a trap later. But as soon as he left, Clark revealed a hidden camera. She had recorded Peter accepting a bribe. Clearly, she was far more cunning than expected. That night, Judge Clark called Fowler, ordering him to collect the evidence the next morning, so they could teach Peter a lesson he'd never forget. Meanwhile, Peter was about to go to bed when his superior knocked on the door. As a friend, the boss confided that Fowler had launched a formal investigation against him, claiming to have proof that Peter had taken a bribe. Peter explained the truth. He had only pretended to go along in order to gather incriminating evidence, but it was useless now. Once the Office of Professional Responsibility had that tape, not even his boss could protect him. Realizing time was running out, Peter called an emergency meeting. They knew Clark had forged signatures, which meant she had pocketed a fortune, but her bank accounts were spotless. Clearly, the dirty money was hidden elsewhere. If they could trace it, they could take her down. That night, Elizabeth went straight to Neal. She explained everything. If Fowler got the tape in the morning, Peter's career was finished. Neal didn't hesitate. Together with Mozzie, he devised a flawless plan to destroy the evidence. For con men of their caliber, it was child's play. The next morning, Mozzie picked a fight with Fowler's courier to stall him. Neal slipped inside and asked the clerk if Judge Clark had a package. She confirmed it and stressed that only Fowler himself could sign for it. Once Neal had the parcel, he ran a degaussing magnet over it, erasing the contents of the tape. Then, posing as a court staffer, he handed the package back to the courier in the stairwell, even forging the clerk's signature. Flustered, the courier rushed off with no suspicion at all. Later, Peter learned from the forced retired agent that he had once requested a warrant to search Clark's office, but it was blocked. He urged Peter to start there. Unbeknownst to him, Neal had just saved him from disaster. At the courthouse, Neal broke into Clark's office using his thief's toolkit. He didn't have time to search, so he trashed the place and planted a bug, hoping she would expose herself. Sure enough, when Clark arrived and saw the chaos, she panicked and ordered her aide to move the safe the next day at noon. She had hidden her dirty money inside the courthouse itself. Meanwhile, Fowler presented the smoking gun tape to Peter's boss, smugly promising a revelation, but when the footage rolled, the screen was nothing but black. What the hell is this? They must have swapped it. Stop wasting my time. Humiliated, Fowler stormed out. Peter glanced at Neal, whose sly smile said it all. He'd saved Peter's career. Both men understood, but neither spoke a word. After all, some victories were best left unspoken. Neal revealed that he knew Judge Clark would move the dirty money the next day, and even which bank she would use. But there was a major problem. Every lead they had was obtained illegally, making it useless in court. They couldn't raid Clark's office without legitimate evidence. That's when Peter had an idea. He thought of Fowler, head of the Office of Professional Responsibility, the only unit allowed to act first and justify later. The challenge was splitting him from Clark, since the two were allies. Peter staged a trap. Knowing his phone was bugged, he called Neal, pretending to beg him for money to bribe Clark. The leak reached Fowler. If Clark didn't get paid by noon, she'd hand over the real tape. Convinced he could catch Peter red-handed, Fowler set the sting himself. Cut to Clark walking into the bank, confident as ever. Fowler pounced, demanding the tape. Clark looked baffled. He snatched her bag, only to find bundles of cash neatly tied, no tape in sight. He had been played. Peter's team swarmed in, surrounding them. With deliberate flair, Peter announced, "Congratulations, Fowler. You personally caught Judge Clark abusing her position for profit." Trapped, Fowler had no way out. Covering for Clark would only doom him too. After a tense pause, he chose self-preservation. "Clark, you're under arrest." "What?" "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly advise you to use it." His colleagues congratulated him. Humiliated but powerless, Fowler swallowed his rage. With Clark gone, he had no reason to stay. Before leaving, he warned Peter coldly, "Don't let me find your weakness." Clark was taken down, the foreclosure case closed. The father and son kept their home, justice restored. The world has its dark corners, but there will always be people fighting to light them up. Soon after, Neal and Peter moved on to their next mission. Exposing an illegal organ trafficking ring, Neal used his wit and psychological tricks to make the ringleader believe he was suffering from kidney failure. First, Agent Jones swapped his suit for a looser one and sprayed it with an itching agent. When the man wore it, the fit was off, and red rashes appeared, convincing him something was wrong with his body. The final blow was blood in his urine. Mozzie, the master of mischief, handled that part. He studied the man's routine, then disguised himself as a delivery worker and slipped food coloring into his drink. Terrified, the ringleader called his personal doctor. After hearing the symptoms, the doctor warned, "Prepare yourself for the worst." Awaiting test results, the man grew desperate, willing to do anything to be cured, exactly what Neal had planned. Days earlier, a wealthy widow had tipped Neal off about a so-called charitable medical foundation that was secretly trafficking organs. The revelation gnawed at Peter. With further digging, they confirmed the truth. The organization was running an international black market scheme under the guise of charity. That night, Neal and Peter disguised themselves as doctors and slipped into a medical conference hosted by the group. Neal struck up a conversation with the leader, Powell. Introducing himself as Parker, a DGI research specialist who often funded aid missions in Africa, Neal immediately captured Powell's attention. Powell confided that he had a very close friend whose kidneys were extremely fragile, his blood pressure dangerously high, and finding a compatible donor was harder than reaching the heavens. If Neal could secure a volunteer kidney donor from Africa, this friend would pay him a fortune, but the FBI already knew the so-called friend was Powell himself. Back at headquarters, Neal and Peter dug deeper, confirming what the wealthy widow had told them. Powell's organization posed as a charity while secretly funneling organs to the rich. Both sides benefited, so no one ever came forward to expose it. To get real proof, Neal decided to infiltrate Powell's private clinic. The next day, Neal staged a scene at the reception desk, with Mozzie pretending to escort a rabies patient for a transfer. "We don't have any transfer scheduled today. Just do as you're told, idiot." Neal jumped in. This was the mayor's cousin, and the mayor didn't want the case public, so no appointment was made. Spooked, the receptionist told them to wait in the lobby. While Mozzie slipped upstairs disguised as a janitor, Neal sneaked into Powell's office. After searching, he found a leather case containing 2 lists, one with wealthy clients awaiting transplants, and another with poor individuals who were perfect donor matches. At that moment, security discovered the break-in and sounded the alarm. Neal scribbled a coded message and faxed it to Peter, but the transmission was cut halfway when guards stormed in. Luckily, Peter recognized the handwriting. Neal was tied to a bed. Seeing his ankle monitor, staff called Powell, who ordered them not to act until he arrived. A nurse injected him with a sedative. Peter, realizing Neal was in danger, traced the signal from the anklet to Powell's clinic. Without an appointment, he couldn't get inside until he ran into an old acquaintance who let him tag along. Inside, Peter found Neal unconscious on a bed. He quickly moved him to a conference room and erased the security footage so Powell wouldn't know anyone had broken in. When Neal came to, he revealed what he'd seen. A list of high-profile figures willing to pay fortunes for organs, but since the fax had been cut off, the FBI only had the half listing poor donors. Still, their testimonies could be enough. Interviews confirmed the scheme. Powell's mobile clinics collected blood samples everywhere. If a poor person matched, they'd get $200,000 to donate. Powell then sold the organ to the wealthy for millions, pocketing the difference. The problem was clear. The poor wouldn't risk losing their payday by testifying, and the rich had no interest in exposing Powell. The FBI had the truth, but no case. That's when Neal came up with a plan: force Powell to tap into the charity's funds, then trace the money back to his real accounts, exposing the organ trafficking operation once and for all. Neal used his master con artist skills to convince Powell he was suffering from kidney failure. At such a life-or-death moment, panic would override reason. Using his former alias, Neal called Powell and claimed he had found the perfect donor kidney for his friend, urging him to book a flight to India immediately. Excited, Powell left his house at once. Agent Jones, disguised as a driver, picked him up and handed him a bottle of water. When Powell woke up, he was lying in a shabby room, surrounded by voices speaking a language he couldn't understand. Neal entered and told him, "You're in India. You collapsed on the plane. We have to remove your kidney now or your life is in danger." Terrified, Powell begged them to go ahead with the surgery. But Neal added that the donor suddenly raised the price, $30 million. Powell realized he was being conned, but desperate to survive, he revealed a secret account. It was the very account he used to siphon money from the charity fund, supposedly untraceable. With the password in hand, Neal smiled and walked out. Powell soon discovered the IV line was fake, nothing but tape on his skin. Stumbling outside, he froze. He was still in New York. Waiting at the door was Peter, backed by the FBI. Thanks to the account information Powell himself had provided, the Bureau quickly uncovered his illegal transactions. The city's biggest organ trafficking kingpin was finally caught. In a luxurious mansion, a well-known financial expert was shot dead. The police rushed to the scene. A woman there claimed that as she and her boss arrived home, a man ambushed and killed him before fleeing through the back door. Agent Jones found footprints at the exit, but Neal noticed something odd. The woman's ID card looked fake. He poured some liquor on it and wiped. The ink began to fade. Peter connected the dots. The soil under the victim's shoes matched a toppled flower pot inside the house. That meant there was no third person. The woman herself was the killer, using the victim's shoes to plant false tracks. But by the time agents tried to secure her at the hospital, she had slipped away, pretending to use the restroom. Her bag revealed more clues: a forged ID, no fingerprints, and a gun tossed into the fireplace with the serial number scratched off. Clearly, she was a professional. Neal then spotted a scrap of paper with strange letters, likely a code. That night, he obsessed over it, pouring every ounce of his criminal expertise into deciphering the text. By the next morning, while talking with Peter, inspiration struck. It was a simple Caesar shift cipher. Each letter moved 5 positions. A becomes E, B becomes F. Once cracked, the message revealed something chilling: a hit list of upcoming targets. The murdered financial expert was listed as the 4th target. This meant the female assassin had already taken care of 3 others, and the final name on the list could be the key to cracking the case. Investigations revealed that everyone on the list was a powerful figure in different industries. Fingerprints at the scene suggested the woman had been searching for something. The first 3 men likely struck a deal with her, which explained why they were still alive. Clearly, all 5 men were tied to a rare treasure she was desperate to collect. Peter and Neal tracked down the last man on the list. Shown a photo, he insisted he'd never seen the woman before. So, they brought him to the murdered financier's mansion, still sealed off by the FBI. As he looked around, he spotted a jade elephant, identical to the one he owned. Neal explained, these jade elephants dated back to the Ming dynasty, once gifted to world leaders as priceless treasures. A single piece was worth $800,000, but if all 5 were gathered, their value could soar past $200 million. To lure the killer out, the wealthy man posted a dating profile online. Sure enough, she took the bait. Peter sent Neal, the master con artist, to pose as the tycoon. At their meeting, she immediately questioned why he didn't look like his photo. Neal confessed he wasn't the man in the profile but a criminal expert now working as an FBI consultant. He claimed he had already secured 2 of the jade elephants by abusing his position and proposed they work together to make a fortune. The woman remained cautious, never revealing her identity. The plan fell apart, but when Neal returned home, she was waiting inside, demanding the artifacts or threatening to kill him. Neal told her they weren't there but offered to lead her to them. To prove his sincerity, he cut off his ankle monitor, but cleverly let the wires spark against each other, sending out a hidden signal. Peter received the alert. Before the signal fully died, the tracker blinked in a Morse code pattern. Go home. Neal wasn't referring to his place, he meant Peter's house. Sure enough, Neal took the woman to Peter's home, claiming the elephants were hidden there. While she searched, Neal could only hope Peter understood the message. Outside, Peter had already mobilized the FBI. Get the battering ram ready. Are you crazy? That's my house. I've got the key. Inside, the woman grew frustrated at not finding the treasure. Neal calmly assured her he didn't want to die over money either. At that moment, the FBI swarmed the house. Peter quietly unlocked the door. If anyone breaks something in here, my wife will personally deal with you. The team flicked on every light in the house, startling the woman. FBI agents stormed in, capturing her alive without firing a single shot. The case was closed. With nothing more than a tampered ankle monitor, Neal and Peter's flawless teamwork had once again turned the tide. A man was suddenly struck by a speeding car right outside his house. By coincidence, Peter and Neal witnessed the entire scene. The victim died instantly. Later, Neal discovered he was an ex-con thief, just released on bail before the accident. Clearly, there was more to his death than met the eye. Peter brought in FBI records. The man's last heist was stealing an antique cork and wax seal from the Museum of Natural History. These relics were old but held little actual value. Why would he steal something so worthless? That's when Neal remembered an old wager with his rival Matthew, an equally skilled forger. Years ago, Matthew challenged Neal to recreate a rare Ben Franklin wine bottle and see whose fake could fool auction experts. Neal hadn't cared for the childish bet back then, but now it was tied to murder. To replicate the Franklin bottle, one needed that exact antique cork and wax seal. Clearly, Matthew had the thief steal them, and then silenced him permanently. Neal posed as a wealthy businessman to approach a female broker who funneled Matthew's fakes into the world's top auction house. She proudly showed Neal a climate-controlled wine cellar filled with priceless vintages. While browsing, Neal spotted a slip of paper tucked in a book. Meet at 8 p.m. He knew immediately it was Matthew's message. On the way home, Peter called. Matthew had once teamed up with a mob crew for a major heist but kept all the loot. Now the mob had a hit out on him. Selling the fake Franklin bottle was likely his way to raise cash fast. At exactly 8 p.m., Neal crossed his usual street and found Matthew waiting. Matthew declared, "My Franklin bottle passed inspection. If yours does too, I'll concede defeat and leave you alone." Neal instantly formed a plan to turn the tables. The next day, Neal told Peter. They both suspected Matthew killed the thief, but had no proof. Neal suggested exposing the Franklin bottle at the auction as a fake. They could charge Matthew with fraud. Mozzie sourced the rare materials, and Neal worked his magic to create a flawless copy of the Franklin bottle. When auction day arrived, Neal and Peter showed up, yet Matthew was nowhere in sight. He was likely watching the livestream instead of showing his face. Neal handed over their forged bottle for examination. Even the veteran appraiser couldn't spot a difference. That was exactly what Neal intended. He knew auction houses rarely ran costly cosium tests to date the wine, which explained how Matthew's fake had slipped through. Neal requested both bottles undergo the test. If both turned out fake, Matthew's scheme would collapse. The test would take 3 hours, so the auction was put on hold. Meanwhile, the FBI tracked livestream viewers and noticed one account broadcasting from a nearby parking lot. Nobody watches an auction from a parking garage unless they're planning a quick getaway. Peter ordered his team to move in on Matthew. The auction house completed the test. The director announced on stage, Neal's bottle was a fake, while Matthew's was genuine, the one and only Ben Franklin wine bottle in existence. Neal froze. No forgery could ever pass a cosium test. Could it be Matthew's bottle was actually real? Suddenly, everything made sense. Matthew had played them from the start, setting up distractions so they believed his bottle was fake. By submitting Neal's copy for testing, the auction had publicly confirmed Matthew's was authentic, drawing worldwide attention. Their plan to nail him collapsed. But Neal thought fast, urging Peter to move on Matthew immediately. Meanwhile, Mozzie slipped into the auction with news. The mob was tailing Matthew closely. If he collected the money, FBI might lose him, but if chaos broke out, the mob would kill him first. Peter rushed his team to the parking lot, only to find an iPad streaming the auction. Matthew was already gone. Neal realized this meant Matthew had no idea what was happening inside. By then, bidding for the real Franklin bottle skyrocketed to $800,000. This is a terrible idea. Do it, Mozzie. They don't take IOUs, you know. Mozzie suddenly raised his paddle. $1 million. The crowd gasped, and Neal secured the bottle. Peter nearly exploded. An FBI case had just cost them $1 million. Security footage showed Matthew at a nearby helipad. Neal sprinted there, arriving at the same time as the mob. Not wanting a showdown, Matthew turned to flee. I'm the one who bought the Franklin bottle. Matthew froze, knowing Neal didn't have that kind of money. Peter arrived with agents, seizing the wine as evidence. It could be held for years. Neal taunted Matthew. You can walk away, but when your mob friends find out, what do you think they'll do? The only other option was turning himself in. Matthew backed down but sneered. This isn't over, Neal. I'll be back. I'll be counting the days. Later, at a diplomatic gala, Neal shocked the room by declaring, I'm an internationally infamous art thief, and tonight, I'm stealing something from here. Guests laughed, thinking it a joke. Security didn't. They dragged him to the basement, locking him away. But Neal had planned it all. Mozzie and Alex, disguised as guests and staff, planted lipstick-sized smoke bombs throughout the venue. When the fire alarms blared, panic erupted. Guards ran to check the chaos. Mozzie slipped downstairs to free Neal. To Neal, locks were child's play. Only the ever-present security cameras posed a problem. Mozzie quickly found Neal and pulled out a small camera he had prepared. He snapped a picture from the same angle as the surveillance feed, then held the photo up in front of the lens, tricking security. Even if it shook a little, it didn't matter. Neal slipped into the next room. This was why he had let himself get caught in the first place. Inside was the vault. He pulled the cloth off a nearby statue, one he himself had forged years ago and gifted to the consulate. To the naked eye it looked real, so they had stored it as a treasure. Neal removed the statue's hammer, smashed open its back, and retrieved the tools hidden inside. Among them was a drill. He bored a hole into the safe, inserted a tiny camera, and picked the lock while watching the feed. In moments, the safe clicked open. Inside was the infamous music box, the very object that had caused so much chaos. If he handed it to Fowler, Kate would finally be free. Meanwhile, security realized the smoke wasn't an accident but sabotage. They dispatched guards to the vault. Neal had just taken the music box when Alex called from the back door. He handed it to her, only for Alex to lift his keycard mid-embrace. As Neal turned to let Mozzie in, she slammed the door, kept the box, and tossed the card back to him. With no time to chase her, Neal chose Mozzie over the music box. He freed him, jammed the door with the statue's hammer, and together they slipped past security. Back home, Peter was waiting. He brought good news. The consulate, embarrassed by the music box's murky origins, wouldn't issue a warrant. But Peter also revealed he knew about Neal's secret deal with Fowler. He warned him, don't befriend a wolf and expect not to be bitten. You'll lose everything. Then he added, we're partners, Neal. I've figured out how to take Fowler down. Once he's gone, we can save Kate. Later, a wealthy patron brought Alex to Neal, music box in hand. Neal thanked the woman, understanding it was a final goodbye. Alex returned the box, confessing her jealousy of how much he loved Kate. She called it a small lesson, then wished them a lifetime of happiness, a blessing heavy with unspoken regret. Neal hurried to Fowler. As promised, Fowler handed over new identities for Neal and Kate. Neal didn't care what secrets the music box held. He only wanted to run away with her. Fowler said, Kate's waiting. The time and place are in this file. Live well, Neal. Meanwhile, Peter sent Agent Berrigan into Fowler's office while he was away. She copied the entire hard drive. When another agent walked in, she pretended Fowler had sent her to prep files for a meeting. Though she fooled him, she knew her cover was blown. By the time he returned, she was gone, leaving only a warning on the computer screen. He called Fowler. We've got a problem. Someone tampered with your computer. She said she was IT. I see. Before leaving for good, Neal visited Mozzie. Their time together had been short but meaningful. Mozzie sincerely wished Neal and Kate peace under their new identities. He said only one thing, if you ever need me, I'll be here. This place isn't the same without me. At the same time, as Berrigan was leaving the garage after reporting to Peter, Fowler ambushed her. Knowing she was Peter's trusted subordinate, he pulled a gun and demanded the copied files. Luckily, Peter arrived just in time, and a standoff ensued. Fowler warned Peter not to meddle, claiming the powerful figure behind all this was untouchable, but Peter suddenly drew his gun and fired first. Fortunately, Fowler was wearing a bulletproof vest. Take a deep breath. You knew he was wearing a vest. Honestly, I didn't. Catching his breath, Fowler told Peter it was already too late. He had finished his deal with Neal. When Peter spotted the music box in Fowler's car, he realized Neal had met him. Neal's about to leave. Tell me where he is. Why do you care so much about him? When Fowler refused to answer, Peter pulled out the USB and threatened to send it straight to DC if he stayed silent. Hudson Airstrip, Hangar 4. Peter rushed to the airport. There, he saw Neal and his girlfriend preparing to flee. He called out, stopping him just in time. After everything they'd been through together, their relationship had grown from FBI agent and conman to something closer to brothers in arms. Peter asked why Neal wanted to leave when he now had a legal identity. Why not stay in New York with the woman he loved, build a life, and let them all support each other? But Neal had already made up his mind.
I gotta go.
You said goodbye to everyone but me. Why?
You know why.
Tell me.
Because you're the only one who could change my mind.
Did I?
Neal couldn't bring himself to say more. Seeing Kate waiting on the plane, he held back his tears and walked toward her. But just a few steps later, he hesitated. Maybe they could live happily in New York after all. He turned back to tell Peter, when suddenly, the plane behind him exploded in flames. Watching the woman he loved die before his eyes, Neal swore he would uncover the mastermind and avenge her death. And that concludes Season 1 of White Collar. What do you think of this show? On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.